Before I tell you about the contract, I need to tell you about the funeral. Clara Whitfield buried her father on a Tuesday morning with $11.30 in her pocket, a mended black dress that had been her mother's, and a debt notice tucked inside her boot because she had nowhere else to put it. The sky was the color of pewter. The minister kept the service short, not out of cruelty, but because the wind off the mountains had turned sharp, and there were only 4 people present, and 2 of them were hired gravediggers waiting to finish the bomb so they could go warm themselves by a fire somewhere. Clara did not cry. She had used up her tears 3 weeks earlier, the night the doctor pulled her aside and told her Thomas Whitfield had maybe 10 days. She had gone behind the barn and cried until she couldn't breathe, until her chest hurt, until there was nothing left. When she walked back inside, she was someone different, someone who had already started calculating. She was 24 years old and she was very good at calculating. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit the like button and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. Now let me take you back to that hillside. A poor woman signed a marriage contract to survive what she discovered. Changed everything, Colorado territory. Autumn 1887. The gravediggers finished their work. The minister shook Clara's hand with practiced solemnity and walked away. The 2 neighbors who had come, Bessie Caldwell from the trading post and old Mr. Farnsworth, who had known her father for 20 years, offered their condolences and their quiet, helpless sympathy, and then they too were gone. Clara stood alone at the fresh mound of earth for exactly as long as it took to say goodbye. Then she turned around. Standing 20 feet away, hat in hand, was a man she had never seen before. He was tall, dark-haired, built like someone who worked with his hands. Not the broad, thick build of a laborer, but the lean, efficient build of someone who'd spent long days in difficult country. His clothes were worn but not poor. His boots were the quality that lasted. He held his hat with both hands in front of him, and he had the stillness of a man who had learned to wait. His eyes, when they met hers, were gray, clear and steady, and watching her with an attention that was nothing like the sympathetic awkwardness everyone else had offered that morning. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "Mrs." Clara corrected by reflex, then caught herself. Strange how quickly the word came. She had been using it since she was 19, when her mother died and she became the woman of the house. Not married, just the last one standing. "Miss, I apologize. What can I do for you?" "My name is Jonah Hale. I knew your father. Not well, but enough that I wanted to pay my respects." He paused. "And enough that I knew to come today rather than wait." Clara looked at him more carefully. The name meant nothing to her. Her father had known dozens of men in his years as a supplier and freighterman who came and went, names she'd never learned, transactions she'd kept the books on without knowing the faces. "He never mentioned you," she said. "No, he wouldn't have." Something flickered in those gray eyes. "We had an understanding between us. Private. I won't insult you by pretending otherwise." The wind picked up off the mountain. Clara's thin coat was not enough for this weather, but she had sold the good wool coat 3 months ago for medicine money, and she was too cold to stand here making polite conversation. "Mr. Hale, my father is buried and I have things to attend to. If you have business—" "I do." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. "Samuel Carrick came to see me yesterday. He's your father's primary creditor, as I understand it. He told me he'd be coming to the property at dawn tomorrow." Clara did not move. "That's my business, not yours. He also told me he'd be filing with the territorial court by the end of the week, which means you'd lose the land, the cabin, everything." "I'm aware of that, too." Jonah Hale held the envelope out. Not aggressively, not with the particular triumph of a man who had the upper hand. Just steadily, like someone offering something they believed to be useful. "I paid him this morning," he said. "Your father's full debt, $260. And the Devlin note too, that's another 40. Total 300 even." The world went quiet. Clara looked at the envelope. She did not take it. "Why?" The word came out flat, stripped of everything except the most important thing. "Because I need a wife," Jonah said. "And because your father asked me a long time ago to look out for you if things went wrong." She did not cry in front of him. She would not do that. She took the envelope. She asked him to give her until morning to think. He said yes without pressure, without conditions, without the particular satisfaction of a man who already knew the answer. He told her he would be at the hotel in town at dawn, and that if she came, he would have papers ready, and if she didn't come, he would understand, and either way, the debt was settled. Then he left. Clara walked back to the cabin alone. It was smaller than she remembered, or maybe it had always been this small, and she had just stopped seeing it. 2 rooms, a fireplace that smoked when the wind came from the north. Her father's cot where he had spent the last 4 months, the blankets still carrying the particular smell of sickness that she hadn't yet been able to face washing out. She sat at the table and opened the envelope. Inside was not a receipt. It was a document. Clara read it twice. Then a third time slowly, the way she had learned to read contracts and ledgers and promissory notes over years of managing accounts for a man who was better at moving freight than keeping records. The document was a marriage contract. It was different from anything she had expected. It was precise, the kind of precise that required a real lawyer and good paper and careful thought. It was written in clean formal language that laid out every term without ambiguity, which was itself unusual enough to make her suspicious. Jonah Hale agreed to pay her father's debts in full, transfer the Whitfield property into Clara's name, free and clear, provide housing, food, and clothing, and treat her as a partner in the management of his household. Clara agreed to accompany him as his wife managed the household during his absences, maintained discretion about his personal and business affairs, and here she read more carefully, refrained from corresponding with certain named individuals without his knowledge. The named individuals were 3, a woman called Margaret Hale, a man called Richard Hale, and a lawyer's firm in Denver. That it was strange. What was stranger was the clause at the bottom. In the event of Jonah Hale's death within 5 years of the marriage date, full ownership of all Hale-named properties and assets currently held under his name would pass to Clara Whitfield Hale to be held in perpetuity. She read that section 4 times. A man who wanted a convenient wife for domestic purposes did not write clauses like that. A man who wanted to keep a woman on his property as a housekeeper did not give her that kind of protection. A man who was doing something ordinary did not have a lawyer draft escape routes for his wife in case he died. Jonah Hale was afraid of something. Clara set the contract down. She looked at the fire. She thought about what she was, 24 years old. No money, no family, no prospects she could name in a territory that would eat her by winter if she didn't find something to hold on to. She thought about what he was, a stranger with gray eyes who had paid $300 for a conversation, who had spoken to her father in secret, who had written a marriage contract that protected her more than it protected him. She thought about her father's hands, large, calloused, always slightly rough against her cheek when she was young, always warm. She thought about what she had heard him say once when he thought she wasn't listening to a man whose name she hadn't caught at the time. Some men are worth trusting before you understand why. You'll know them by the fact that they don't ask you to trust them. She pulled out pen and paper. Mr. Hale, she wrote, I accept your proposal on 2 conditions. First, I want to speak with Samuel Carrick directly before we marry to verify the debt is settled. Second, I want the clause about your death explained to me before I sign anything. I do not require romance, but I do require honesty. If you can give me that, I will meet you at dawn. Clara Whitfield. She folded it, sealed it, and sent it with the boy who ran errands in town before she went to bed. She did not sleep much, but she did not lie awake in fear. She lay awake making a list of what she knew, what she didn't, and what she needed to find out. That was better than fear. It was what her father had taught her, even if he had taught her most things by accident. Dawn came cold and clean, the kind of morning that made the mountains look like something that had been painted rather than grown. Clara dressed in her best, the mended black dress again, because it was the only thing she owned that was presentable, pinned up her hair, and walked to town. The hotel was nothing remarkable. 2 stories, glass windows in the front room. Jonah Hale was sitting at a table by the window with 2 cups of coffee and a leather folder, and he stood when she came in, which was something men did not always do for women of her circumstances. She sat across from him. She drank the coffee. It was good, better than anything she'd had in months. Samuel Carrick, she said. He'll be at the bank at 8 o'clock. We can go there before the judge's office if you want. I want. She looked at him. The clause. Jonah was quiet for a moment. He wrapped both hands around his own cup and looked at it rather than at her. And Clara recognized this. This was what it looked like when someone was choosing how much to say. There are people, he said finally, who want to take things from me, things my father left me, The clause protects you if they succeed, if they find a way to remove me before the agreement I made with the trustees expires. What agreement with what trustees? He looked up. Something moved in his expression. Not evasion exactly, more like a man deciding that the only way to ask for trust was to start offering the truth. My full name is Jonah William Hale. My father was Richard Hale Sr. He owned Hale Timber logging operations across 3 territories. When he died, he left everything to me. Not to my uncle, who had run operations for 20 years. Not to my Aunt Margaret, who controlled the company's finances. To me. He paused. I was 26. I had spent 5 years as a land surveyor. I didn't know boardrooms. I made mistakes. Within a year, my aunt had enough support among the trustees to challenge my fitness to inherit. Rather than fight in court for years destroying what my father built, I signed an agreement, 10 years away from company operations. They stopped trying to destroy me. At the end, I reclaimed full control. Clara absorbed this. You're worth a fortune, Bon. On paper, not in practice, not until the agreement expires. 3 more years. 2.5. And your aunt, Margaret. His jaw tightened. She's been looking for grounds to challenge the agreement. If she can prove I'm unfit, if she can find evidence of immoral conduct, instability, anything that contradicts the terms, she can petition the trustees to void my ownership entirely. He met her eyes. A man living alone in the mountains with no family, no household, no evidence of a settled life that's easier to call unfit than a married man living quietly with a wife. Clara looked at the leather folder. So I'm a legal shield. You're a legal shield who will know the truth of what you're shielding from the first minute of our arrangement. Yes. And the death clause. Because Margaret is not a safe woman to have as an enemy, I am not planning to die, but I am also not naive. His voice was level. If something happens to me, I don't want to leave the woman who helped me with nothing. The clause is my way of honoring that obligation in advance. She studied him. He did not look away. Why me? She asked, not fishing for a compliment. A genuine question. There are women with better connections. Women who wouldn't ask questions. Women with connections to the world I'm hiding from are dangerous to trust. Women who don't ask questions worry me more than women who do. The ghost of something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. Your father spoke of you. He said you ran his accounts for years, that you could read a contract and understand it, that you were honest even when honesty cost you. He paused. Those are rare qualities. They matter more to me than social standing. Clara looked at the contract. She had read it 3 times. She understood it. She had found nothing deceptive in the language. One more condition, she said. Name it. I want to learn. Everything about that valley, that land, everything you know about surviving up there. I'm not willing to be a decorative presence. If I'm your partner on paper, I want to be useful in fact. Jonah Hale looked at her for a long moment. Done, he said. The visit to Carrick's bank was brief and conclusive. Clara watched the banker produce a receipt showing Thomas Whitfield's debts, settled in full, every creditor's name, every amount properly witnessed and sealed. She checked every figure against the numbers she had memorized from her father's ledgers. They matched. The land office came next. Jonah signed the deed transfer, putting the Whitfield property in Clara's name had it witnessed, and handed her the papers without ceremony. She looked at her own name on the deed, Clara Ann Whitfield. Her father's land, hers now, free and clear. Something loosened in her chest that had been tight for a very long time. The judge's office was a small room with a window overlooking the main street and a large man behind a desk who had performed this particular service enough times to do it without fanfare. 2 witnesses from the street. The words spoken. A ring plain silver, not elaborate, slipped onto Clara's finger. It fit. She filed that away in the part of her mind that kept track of details. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the judge said, sounding like a man who had said this several thousand times. You may kiss, though you are not required to. Jonah looked at Clara. She looked back. They shook hands. The judge raised an eyebrow, but made no comment. They rode out of town by mid-morning, 2 horses' supplies packed with the efficiency of a man who knew long distances. Jonah rode ahead, pointing out the trail, naming landmarks, explaining distances. Clara listened and memorized. The mountains rose around them, growing taller and more immediate with every hour of riding. By afternoon, the trail had become steep and the air thin enough to feel. The first night they sheltered in a small stone cabin, one of what Jonah called his trail shelters, tucked against a cliff face stocked with basic necessaries. He built a fire. Clara made food from what she found on the shelves, nothing elaborate but hot and filling. They ate in near silence, which suited them both. He gave her the cot. He settled by the fire with his bedroll. Clara lay down exhausted and looked at the ceiling, the rough-hewn logs, the single lantern still burning low. The shape of her new husband across the room, sitting now with a rifle across his knees, not sleeping, watching the fire. She lay still. She was married. To a stranger. Who was wealthy and in hiding and afraid of things he had been honest about, and who had signed a contract that protected her more than it protected himself, and who had paid $300 for her cooperation, and then looked at her like she was a person rather than a purchase. She should have been afraid. She had expected to be afraid. Instead, she lay in the darkness and felt nothing she had a word for, something that was not fear, something that was closer to the particular quiet of a woman who has made a decision and knows it is done and is now simply watching to see what comes next. She watched Jonah Hale's profile in the firelight. He was not what she had expected. She did not yet know what she had expected. But it was not this careful, honest, guarded man who answered her questions directly and kept his word and sat up in the night watching the door without needing her to thank him for it. She fell asleep to the sound of the fire. And there was nothing on any side but mountain and sky and the particular silence of very high country. And then Jonah crested a ridge and stopped, and Clara pulled up beside him and saw below them a valley that had no right to exist. Green. Impossibly green in the middle of all that stone and pine. A river running silver through the center of it. Meadows and stands of aspen going gold at the edges and beyond the tree line tucked where the mountain folded. A lodge. Not a cabin, not a trapper's shelter. A lodge. 2 stories of massive logs and riverstone chimneys, a wide porch wrapping around the front glass windows, catching the afternoon light and throwing it back like something burning. Clara said nothing for a long moment. "You told me you were a trapper," she said. "I am, among other things. Trappers don't build this. This one did." He watched her face. "My father bought the land, started the lodge. I finished it after he died. 3 years and more money than I like to think about." His voice had gone quieter. "It's mine, not his, not the company's. Mine." Clara looked at the valley below the meadows that had clearly been cultivated, the irrigation channels, the well-kept outbuildings. Someone had spent years turning this into something that worked, something that lasted. "Let's go down," she said. "Dormir." Inside the lodge, the scale of what she had walked into became fully clear. The main room was the size of most houses. High ceilings. A fireplace you could stand in. Shelves of books, more books than Clara had seen outside a library along one full wall. Furniture that was worn with use, but clearly quality. Rugs underfoot. Windows on 3 sides that let in light from every direction. "You built this." "With help." Jonah moved to the fireplace and began building a fire. "Good men, my father's carpenters. 3 years." "The books." "Mine. I was a surveyor before all this. I read when the weather keeps me inside." Clara walked along the shelves reading spines. Geology, botany, law, history. 2 full shelves of forestry texts, technical and dense. A set of surveying manuals that had been used hard, the spines broken in multiple places. Shakespeare in the corner, which she had not expected. "Have you read all of these?" "Most. The geology I read twice." She turned. He was looking at her from across the room with that same careful attention she had noticed at the funeral, like a man who had learned to watch things closely because the details mattered. "There are 6 bedrooms upstairs," he said. "You can have whichever you prefer. I'm in the one at the north end." Clara held his gaze. "We're not sharing. Not unless you want to, and not because you're obligated by the contract." He said it without embarrassment, without pressure. "If that changes, it'll be our decision, not the papers." She nodded slowly. "East bedroom, the one with the sunrise windows." "It's yours." That evening, after she had put together a meal from the well-stocked kitchen, better supply than she had any right to expect, and they had eaten in the particular quiet of two people still learning how to be in the same room, Clara helped clear the dishes while Jonah worked at his desk. Ledgers and maps spread out under the lamplight. She came to stand near him, looking at the maps, detailed, hand-drawn in places with notations she recognized as survey marks, elevation readings, timber estimates. You still track the company. I have to know what's happening. He didn't look up. Even if I can't act on it, it's mine. In 2.5 years, I have to be ready to take it back. Who's running it now? The trustees, formally. Margaret in practice. She controls 3 votes on the board. His pencil moved across the paper, precise. She's been redirecting contracts, shell companies, money that should go to the workers' fund going somewhere else. His jaw tightened. I've been documenting it, every transaction I can access, every name. Clara leaned over slightly to look at the ledger page. The handwriting was neat, organized, cross-referenced. This was not the work of an angry man hoping to make accusations. This was evidence, carefully built, patiently assembled. 3 years of this, she said, 2.5, started 6 months in when I realized she wasn't going to stop. And what will you do with it? He looked up at her. When the agreement expires, take it to the trustees, file charges if they'll hear them. Reclaim what she's been stealing. His voice was quiet, but carrying something underneath it, something she recognized as grief wearing the clothes of determination. My father built that company honestly. He paid fair wages. He had safety standards when no one else did. 3 men died because someone cut corners he had explicitly forbidden. Margaret has undone all of it. He paused. I want to undo what she's done. Clara studied his face. You loved him. Yes. You think she killed him. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise, more like the recognition of someone who had been seen. I think she arranged things until his heart gave out, he said finally. I can't prove it. I know what I know. Clara pulled a chair over and sat down beside him. Show me what you were working on, she said. He looked at her. I kept my father's accounts for 4 years, she said. I can read a ledger. If you're building evidence, 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. For a long moment he was still. Then he turned the ledger toward her. They worked until the lamp burned low. In the morning, a letter arrived with the supply rider who came once a month up the trail from the valley entrance. Clara was in the kitchen when Jonah brought it in. She saw his face change, not dramatically, just a slight contraction around the eyes, a stillness that was different from his usual stillness. What is it? He set the letter on the table. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Jonah Hale in handwriting that was elegant and deliberate. Margaret, he said. She found out about the marriage. I expected this. Clara looked at the envelope. She moves quickly. She's been waiting for me to do something she can use. She didn't expect this. He sat down. She'll look for problems. Come here herself or send someone. Try to prove the marriage isn't real. Clara opened the letter without asking permission. She read it, then she folded it and set it back on the table. She sent someone already, she said. That's what the postscript means. My associate, Mr. R, will be in your area within the fortnight. That's not a cousin paying a social call. Jonah was watching her. No. Your Uncle Richard. My uncle by my aunt's marriage, not blood. He does what she tells him. Clara thought for a moment. What does he expect to find? A woman I paid to sign a paper, a domestic arrangement with no real substance. Separate bedrooms, nervousness, something he can report back as proof we're fraudulent. Then we give him nothing to find. Clara stood. Teach me the property. If someone's coming to investigate whether this marriage is real, I should know my own home. Jonah looked at her for a moment longer. Then he stood too. Get your coat, he said. We'll start with the boundaries. They spent 3 days learning the valley together. Jonah taught and Clara learned not passively, but actively asking questions, testing her own memory of what she'd been shown, correcting herself when she was wrong. The boundary markers, the trail system, the location of every water source, the seasonal patterns of the river, the places where the snow came first and went last, and what that meant for safe travel. She learned to read the mountains, the way clouds gathered against particular peaks before a storm. The color of the sky that meant wind was coming down from the north. The sound of the river when the upstream snowmelt was running fast. She was a good student. She had always been a good student. And Jonah was a good teacher, patient without being condescending, thorough without being exhausting. He corrected her without making her feel small. He answered questions she didn't quite know how to ask by watching what confused her and addressing it before she had to admit the confusion. On the third evening, they sat on the porch after supper, watching the last light go off the peaks. It was the first time they had sat together without working. Jonah had a cup of coffee. Clara had tea. The valley spread below them in the dimming gold of early autumn, and the sound of the river came up through the cooling air. And somewhere in the trees, an owl started its early work. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Clara thought about her father's letter. It was tucked in her coat pocket. She had found it in the saddlebag along with a few of her father's belongings that someone had packed without her knowledge. A sealed envelope with "For Clara" on the outside. She had opened it that first night in the lodge. She had read it 3 times and then put it away and not thought about it directly, only around the edges, the way you look at something too bright. Her father had written, "I know you'll think this is madness. I know you'll wonder why I never told you. The truth is, I owe Jonah Hale's father a debt that has nothing to do with money. We served together in the early days before he was what he became. He was a good man. He asked me once to look after his son if things went wrong. I tried to do that much at the end. I hope it was enough. I hope he's what I believe him to be. I hope you'll have a chance to find out." She had not told Jonah about the letter. She was not sure why. Maybe because it felt like something private. Something between her and her father, and the particular grief of a man who had done his best and known it wasn't quite enough. Maybe because she wasn't ready to show Jonah that much of her hand yet. Maybe because she was still learning whether he was what she hoped. "You're thinking," Jonah said. "I usually am. About Richard. Among other things." She set down her cup. "He'll be here within the week if that postscript means what I think it means. We should decide what we want him to see. The truth." "Which truth?" She looked at him sideways. "The truth is 2 people who signed a legal contract 4 days ago and are still strangers. That won't survive scrutiny." Jonah was quiet. "What do you suggest?" "We keep working, learning the land together. Working together. If someone is watching, and there probably will be someone watching before Richard shows up, they should see 2 people who know each other, who operate together without thinking about it." She paused. "That's what real looks like. Not passion, just competence in the same space." He considered this. "You've thought about this before." "I think about most things before I say them." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. "All right," he said. "We keep working." Clara nodded. She picked up her tea. The owl called again, closer now. "One more question," she said. "Ask." "The letter from Margaret. She knows about the marriage. She knows my name. How so?" Jonah went still. She watched it happen, the careful assessment of what he knew and what it meant. "Someone in town," he said. "Or someone who followed me. She has people. She's always had people. She had people before we married." "Yes. Which means she may know things about me that I haven't told you." He turned to look at her directly. "What things were saying?" Clara met his gaze. "Nothing shameful, but I want you to hear it from me before someone else shapes the telling." She set down her cup. "I have no money, no family, no social connections. My father died in debt, and I've been managing on empty for 2 years. Those are facts Margaret can use to paint me as someone who married you for financial gain. You did marry me for financial survival. Yes, the difference between that and greed is something I'm capable of explaining. But I want you to know the full picture before we walk into anything." She looked at him. "Is there anything about my background you already know, anything her people might have told her?" Jonah was quiet for a moment. "I know your father died 2 days before I came to the funeral. I know you've been managing his affairs alone for at least a year. I know you kept the household running on almost nothing." He paused. "I know you haven't asked me for anything beyond what the contract specified." Clara nodded slowly. "That's accurate. Is there anything else I should know?" she thought. "Not that would hurt us. My life has been quiet, poor but quiet." She looked at the darkening valley. I've never been in trouble, never caused trouble, never given anyone a reason to use me against someone else. She paused. Until now. Jonah looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to it. The recognition of a person who had been honest with you at personal cost. Thank you, he said, for telling me. We're partners, she said. Partners tell each other things. She went inside before the dark came fully down. She lay in the east bedroom with its sunrise windows and listened to the valley settle into night and thought about her father's letter and about a man who had built a hiding place in the mountains and filled it with books and furniture and careful documentation of everything done wrong in his name. And she thought that her father, who had known this man's father, who had been honest about his own failures in the only way left to him, might have been right about the son. She was not ready to say so yet, but she filed it away in that part of her mind that kept track of things worth knowing. 3 weeks later. Richard Hale arrived on a Thursday, which was the kind of detail that Clara noticed because she noticed everything. He came on a good horse with 2 men behind him, and he rode into the valley the way men who are used to being allowed everywhere ride without pausing, without calling out directly to the lodge's front steps, as though he had already decided the property was his to enter. Clara was behind the lodge when she heard the horses. She had been splitting kindling, one of a dozen practical tasks she had taken on in the 3 weeks since arriving, and one she had gotten efficient at with practiced daily repetition. She set down the axe and walked around the side of the building. Jonah was already on the porch. She saw his body language shift when he recognized the rider. Not fear, but a particular kind of watchful tension, like a man who has anticipated something and is now calibrating to the reality of it. Jonah. Richard swung down from his horse with the smooth ease of a man who spent more time in society than in the saddle pretending otherwise. He was maybe 50, silver-haired, handsome in the way of a man who had been handsome and known it for too long. Been a while. Not long enough. Jonah's voice was level. You're trespassing, Richard. State your purpose or leave. Richard spread his hands, a gesture of false friendliness, so practiced it had become habit. Margaret was concerned, heard some interesting news about a wedding. His gaze found Clara still standing at the corner of the building. He assessed her in the particular way powerful people assessed unknown quantities, quickly, thoroughly, and without bothering to conceal it. And here she is. Clara walked toward them without hurrying. She had made a decision in the first second not to wait to be presented, not to hang back and be introduced like a prop. She came to stand beside Jonah and met Richard's gaze directly. Clara Hale, she said, and you are Richard Hale, Jonah's uncle by marriage. The warmth in his smile did not quite reach his eyes. A pleasure, Mrs. Hale. Margaret sends her regards. That's kind of her. We've come a long way. Richard continued, glancing at the lodge with the particular eyes of a man calculating values. I hope you won't object to our coming inside. Just a brief visit. Family business. Leave your guns on the fence, Jonah said, and your men stay outside. Richard's smile thinned slightly, then reassembled. Of course. Inside, Richard made a performance of admiring the lodge while actually cataloging it. Clara watched him do it the way his eyes moved from room to room, noting quality, noting details, building a picture he would report back to Margaret. She had seen this before. Her father had dealt with men who came to assess and then decided. She had learned early to read which kind was which. Richard was not coming to admire. He was coming to find fault. She let him look. Impressive place, he said, settling into a chair by the fireplace with the ease of a man who sat in good chairs regularly. I had no idea you'd done all this, Jonah. Margaret will be very interested. Margaret can be interested in whatever she likes from Denver. Naturally, I know. Richard's gaze shifted to Clara. Mrs. Hale, I hope you'll forgive the directness of what I am about to say. The family has certain legal obligations. The agreement Jonah signed with the trustees requires periodic verification that he's fulfilling its terms. A marriage is significant. We need to be satisfied it's genuine. Clara sat down across from him, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at him with the expression she had used on creditors who came to the door with bad manners. Calm, attentive, giving nothing. What would satisfy you, she asked. A tour of the household, evidence that you're living here together as a married couple, some conversation. He smiled, nothing intrusive. Then we'll give you a tour. She stood before Jonah could speak. Follow me. She led Richard through the main floor herself. The great room with its bookshelves, the kitchen, the dining room, the storage rooms. She answered his questions directly and without hesitation, where she was from, how she and Jonah had met, how long they had been married. The truth in its bones, she had come from a neighboring county. Her father had known Jonah. They had married in October. She did not elaborate. She did not over-explain. She watched his face for the specific expressions of a man who was looking for weakness, and she gave him none. Upstairs was more complicated. Richard stood in the hallway and opened the doors one by one. He paused at Jonah's bedroom. Sparse, functional, clearly a man's space. He paused longer at Clara's room, the east bedroom, with its sunrise windows, where her few belongings were arranged on the dresser and her books were stacked on the nightstand. Separate rooms, different ends of the hall. Interesting arrangement, he said. My wife prefers her own space, Jonah said before Clara could speak. I respect that. Of course, Richard's tone suggested he found this precisely as suspicious as Clara had expected. Though it does raise certain questions about the nature of the Mr. Hale, Clara's voice was level. When your aunt wrote her marriage contract, did she include a clause specifying which side of the bed was acceptable? Richard blinked. The contract Jonah signed with the trustees, she continued, requires a legitimate marriage in the legal sense. It says nothing about sleeping arrangements. If Margaret believes a husband and wife sharing a room is mandatory under Colorado territory law, she's welcome to file that argument with a judge. She met his eyes. In the meantime, I'll thank you not to imply that my private preferences are evidence of fraud. Richard recovered. No implication intended, Mrs. Hale, simply noting, you've noted it, I've addressed it. She moved back toward the stairs. Was there something else? They sat in the great room for another hour. Richard asked questions. Clara answered them. Jonah sat to her left, and she was aware of him not nervously, just as a presence that was steady and close. And once, when she made a point that landed well, she felt rather than saw the slight shift in him that might have been relief or might have been something else. Richard tried several approaches. He tried to flatter her and see if she relaxed. She did not. He tried to suggest she was out of her depth in this household and see if she defended herself. She did not. He tried to imply that Jonah's lifestyle was unsuitable and see if she agreed with him out of loyalty to propriety. She did not. Finally, he tried the direct approach. I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Hale. He leaned forward and the false friendliness dropped somewhat, revealing something cooler underneath. Margaret is prepared to offer you a substantial settlement. If you were to confirm privately, of course, not under any legal obligation, that this marriage is a contractual arrangement rather than a genuine domestic union, she would ensure you were very well provided for. The room went quiet. Clara looked at him. She kept her face very still. How much? She asked. Richard's expression shifted, a tiny flicker of triumph quickly suppressed. $5,000. And what would I need to do exactly? Simply provide a sworn statement that the marriage was arranged for legal purposes rather than genuine, Mr. Hale. Her voice had not changed. It was the same tone she had used for the previous hour, calm, measured, attentive. I want to make sure I understand your offer. You are asking me to commit perjury, to provide false sworn testimony. In exchange for money. Richard's mouth opened. That is what you're describing, she said. Because the marriage is genuine. We live here. We work here together. My husband is the man I chose. She stood. If you repeat this offer to anyone, including your wife, I will have to tell them what you propose. I'd rather not. So I suggest we both agree this conversation didn't happen. She walked to the front door and opened it. Your horses are outside, she said. We appreciate the visit. They watched Richard and his men ride away until the sound of hooves faded into the trees. Then Jonah turned. She expected him to say something about her handling of it. Most men would have had something to say. Instead, he walked to the kitchen and put water on for coffee, and when it was ready, he brought her a cup without asking and sat across from her at the kitchen table in the particular silence of someone who has processed what just happened and is letting it settle. Clara drank her coffee. He'll report back that the sleeping arrangements are suspicious, she said finally. Yes. Margaret will push for a formal review. Almost certainly. Then we need to think about Denver. She set down her cup. She'll want to see us in public, on her territory. She'll want to control the context. Jonah was quiet. She sent a letter before Richard came. I know, I read the postscript. He looked at her. I didn't tell you about the letter. No, but you left it on the desk, and I read it, and I apologize for that if it was private, but I'd rather know things I'm not supposed to know than be surprised by them later. She met his eyes. Was it private? No, he said. I was going to tell you. Good. She folded her hands around the cup. Then tell me about Margaret's reception. The formal invitation arrived 2 days later, as Clara had expected. The Hale Timber Company's 30th anniversary. The Brown Palace Hotel in Denver. Both Jonah and Clara required to attend. The trustees would be present. The family would be present. Margaret had framed it as celebration, but the postscript written in Margaret's careful hand made the real purpose clear, a chance for the trustees to meet your new wife personally. Jonah did not want to go. Clara understood why. He had built this valley specifically to be beyond Margaret's reach. Going to Denver meant walking into her territory, into a room she had arranged, surrounded by allies she had cultivated for years. But the alternative was giving Margaret exactly what she wanted, evidence that they were hiding something. Evidence that the marriage couldn't withstand public scrutiny. We go, Clara said. Jonah looked at the invitation. You understand what you're walking into. A room full of people who want to find me lacking. Yes. She looked at him directly. I've been in rooms like that before. The furniture is more expensive, but the people operate the same way. She paused. What I need from you is the truth about these people. Their names, their interests, their relationships to each other. I need to know the landscape before I walk in. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down, pulled the ledgers toward him, and started talking. They spent 4 days preparing. Jonah taught Clara the names and histories of every significant person who would be at that reception, the 5 trustees, their business interests, their known loyalties. The board members who were genuinely neutral versus those Margaret had cultivated. The society figures who controlled conversation in Denver's upper circles and whose good opinion could shift the room's perception. Clara listened. She asked questions. She cross-referenced what she heard against the notes Jonah had built over 3 years of careful documentation, and she started to understand the full shape of what Margaret had built. It was not simple greed. Margaret Hale was not merely stealing money, though she was doing that too. She was constructing a network of obligation people who owed her favors, who depended on her goodwill, who would be damaged by her fall. She had made herself necessary. That was how she had survived as long as she had. She's afraid, Clara said one evening, looking at the ledgers spread across the dining table. Jonah looked up. Margaret, she's not just ambitious, she's afraid of losing what she's built. Clara looked at the numbers. She controlled this company for 20 years before your father died and left it to you. She had power, influence, access to capital. And then it was gone, given to a 26-year-old she couldn't control. She paused. She's not wrong that she was more qualified to run it than you were at 26. Jonah was very still. No, he said finally. She wasn't wrong about that. She chose the wrong response, but I understand the fear underneath it. Clara looked at him. I'm not defending her. I'm trying to understand her. Those are different things. He was quiet for a moment. Why does it matter understanding her? Because you can't fight someone effectively if you don't understand what they're actually defending. She closed the ledger. She's not defending the company. She's defending the version of herself that ran the company. That's what she can't afford to lose. Jonah was looking at her with that careful attention she had learned meant he was genuinely absorbing something rather than just listening. You would have been formidable in business, he said. I would have been. She said it without bitterness, just fact. In another time, with different doors open, she stood. What time do we leave for Denver? They rode into Denver on a Thursday, again Thursday. Clara noted, which meant nothing, and took rooms in a modest hotel 3 blocks from the Brown Palace. 2 rooms which Jonah arranged without comment. Denver was larger than anything Clara had seen, which was not very large by some standards, but by hers was significant. The streets were paved. The buildings rose 3 and 4 stories. Carriages moved in both directions with practiced efficiency, and the people in them wore clothes that cost more than Clara's father had made in a year. She walked through it carefully, not staring, filing things away. That evening in Jonah's room, they practiced. It felt strange to call it practice. They had been living together for 5 weeks, and in those 5 weeks, something had shifted in the dynamic between them, something quieter and more fundamental than either of them had named. They had learned the rhythms of the same space. They had developed shorthand for the practical business of shared life: who made coffee in the morning, who banked the fire at night, the particular division of tasks that emerged not from negotiation, but from observation and adjustment. But public affection was different from domestic ease. Holding her hand in a room full of people who were watching for performance was different from sitting across a table working through ledgers together. Jonah stood in the small space between the beds and held out his hand. Clara looked at it, then she took it. His hand was warm, calloused at the knuckles and the pad below his thumb in the specific way of someone who worked with tools. Steady. "Look at me," he said, "not like I'm a stranger." She looked at him. She was not sure what she looked like when she looked at him. Normally, she had never tried to observe herself. But she held his gaze and thought about what she knew of him. The careful way he spoke, the patience with which he taught, the particular grief that moved under his voice when he talked about his father, the way he sat up in the night watching the door when he thought she was sleeping. Something in his face shifted. "That's enough," he said quietly. "Don't manufacture anything, just do that." "Do what?" He didn't answer immediately. "Whatever you were thinking about just then." Clara said nothing, but she filed it away. They practiced until neither of them was thinking about practicing anymore, moving through the room together, standing close to small, particular gestures of people who are accustomed to each other's physical presence. Not passionate, not performing, just together. She was not sure when the boundary between practice and something else began to move. She did not say so. She was not ready to say so, but she felt it. The night before the reception, unable to sleep, Clara took out her father's letter and read it again. "I hope he's what I believe him to be. I hope you'll have a chance to find out." She folded it and put it away. Then she pulled out a piece of paper and wrote a letter to no one, just herself, the way she had done as a girl when she needed to understand what she was thinking. She wrote, "He is honest. That is not a small thing. He told me the truth when he didn't have to, and he has not lied since. And when I catch him being careful with his words, he catches himself and says more. He is not easy, but he is not afraid of hard things. Neither am I." She wrote, "I did not plan to feel anything. I planned to be useful. I planned to fulfill the contract and learn the valley and survive." She wrote, "I don't know yet what I feel, but I know that when he looked at me and said, 'Do that,' I understood what he meant. And I think that is more significant than the contract." She folded the paper and burned it in the small lamp flame. Then she went to sleep. In the morning, Carson Webb knocked on her door. She had not expected him. She had never heard the name until 2 hours earlier, when a hotel boy brought up a card with "Mr. Carson Webb, private investigator," printed on it, and underneath in handwriting, "I believe we need to speak before this evening. Alone if possible." Jonah was downstairs getting breakfast. Clara looked at the card for a long time. Then she sent a message back. "Room 12. 10 minutes." The man who arrived was around 40, medium height, carrying the kind of stillness that Clara associated with the people who had spent time watching other people. His clothes were good but not showy. His eyes were sharp and had nothing in them that she read as threat. She did not invite him to sit. She stood by the window with her arms at her sides and waited. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "I work for Margaret Hale. I was hired 8 months ago to investigate your husband. I've been watching this valley at a distance since before your marriage." He paused. "I was hired to find evidence that would allow the trustees to void his ownership." Clara looked at him. "And did you find any?" "No, and no." He said it simply. "I did not." He reached into his coat and produced a leather folder. "I found something else." He set the folder on the small table beside the door and stepped back, giving her space to look at it without him looming. Clara opened it. Inside was a report, 20 pages of detailed investigation. Not about Jonah, about Margaret. Contract irregularities, shell company transactions, fund transfers that did not correspond to any legitimate business purpose, names, dates, amounts. She looked up. "I was hired by Margaret Hale," Carson Webb said again, "but I was trained by Warren Hale, Jonah's father." Something moved in his face. He was the best man I ever worked for. He died because he got too close to the truth about his own company, and I wasn't able to stop it. I've spent 3 years deciding what to do about that. Clara looked at him carefully. You could have brought this to Jonah. I could have, but he would have used it immediately, and that would have given Margaret grounds to claim he was violating the terms of the agreement, interfering in company affairs. He met her eyes. I needed a witness who wasn't bound by the agreement, someone who could testify to receiving this information independently. Me. You. He nodded. I also needed to know whether you were genuine, whether this marriage was what it appeared to be. He paused. It took me 3 weeks to be sure. Clara was very still. And now you're sure. The way you handle the property, the way he defers to your judgment on things he knows better than you, not because he's performing, but because he respects your thinking. The way you sat with those ledgers at midnight. He paused. I've been hired to find fraudulent marriages. I've found several. This is not one. Clara closed the folder. She looked at Carson Webb for a long moment, reading his face the way she had learned to read contract language, looking for the detail that didn't fit. She found nothing. You're going to testify, she said. At the review? Yes, if there is one. He picked up his hat. I thought you should know before tonight, so you're not walking in blind. He turned to leave. Mr. Webb? She stopped him. Why didn't you tell Jonah instead of me? He turned back. Because if Jonah had known, he would have shown it in the room tonight. You won't. He left. Clara stood by the window for a long moment, looking at the street below. Then she put on her coat and went to find her husband. Denver, Colorado, November 1887. She did not tell Jonah about Carson Webb, not immediately. Not because she was hiding it from him. She had decided in the first 5 minutes of their marriage that hiding things from Jonah Hale was both unwise and unnecessary. But because Carson Webb had been right if Jonah knew he would show it. In some infinitesimal shift of his posture, some slightly different calibration of the careful control he wore like armor in rooms full of people who wanted to take things from him, and she needed him to walk into that reception as himself. Guarded, watchful, carrying everything he carried, not with the specific knowledge that the weapon was already loaded and aimed at Margaret's advantage rather than his. She told him in the carriage on the way to the Brown Palace. He went very still. She watched him absorb it, the years of evidence, the particular way Warren Hale's former employee had spent 3 years deciding where his loyalty actually lived. He was my father's, Jonah said. Yes. And he didn't come to me directly. He came to me because I'm not bound by your agreement, because I can testify to receiving the information without it being construed as you interfering in company affairs. She looked at him. He's right. It was the correct approach. Jonah was quiet for another moment. Then you trust him. I trust what I read in that folder. The documentation is thorough the same way yours is. He was trained by the same man. She paused. And I trust my own judgment about people which has not failed me yet. He looked at her. In the carriage lamp his face was shadowed, but she could see his eyes, that sturdy gray, that gave away more than he probably knew when he forgot to guard it. I know, he said. Not an objection, just acknowledgement. He'll be at the review. Not tonight. Tonight he's still Margaret's man as far as she knows. He wants to keep that until the formal proceedings. She smoothed her gloves. Tonight we give Margaret nothing. We simply exist in front of people. Jonah nodded slowly. The carriage stopped. Clara took a breath. The Brown Palace Hotel opened its doors before them like a world assembled for the purpose of intimidation, marble and crystal, and the particular sound of money moving through an expensive room. People in evening dress stood in clusters, their jewelry catching light, their conversations a low, deliberate murmur designed to demonstrate that they were not performing, but simply being themselves. Jonah offered his arm. She took it, and they walked in. Every head turned, and Clara had expected that. She had prepared for that. What she had not fully prepared for was the particular quality of the silence that fell, not the hostile silence of people who disapprove, but the sharp-edged silence of people who are recalibrating. They had expected something easier to dismiss. She held Jonah's arm and walked forward with her spine straight and her face calm and her eyes moving carefully through the room, cataloging. Here was Braftoff lead trustee, heavy-set and watchful, who had been doing this long enough to care more about evidence than appearances. Here were the two board members Jonah had identified as genuinely neutral. Here were three who belonged to Margaret. And here was Margaret herself. She detached from a group near the windows and came toward them with a smile that had been practiced long enough to look nearly natural. She was beautiful in the way of a woman who had always known it and used it effectively. Her dress was impeccable, her posture quite perfect, and her eyes when they reached Clara were doing exactly what Richards had done, assessing, calculating, filing. Jonah, she said it warmly with a particular intimacy of someone who has decided to claim familiarity whether it was earned or not. How wonderful. Her gaze moved to Clara. And this must be your wife. How delightful. Clara Hale, Clara said and took her hand firmly. We've heard so much about you. The faint stress on heard was precise enough to be plausibly accidental. Margaret's smile didn't waver. Call me Margaret. We're family now. She stepped back, encompassing them both. I must introduce you to the trustees. They've been so eager to meet you. The dinner table was a battlefield, arranged to look like a celebration. Clara had been placed, she noted the seating chart before she sat because she always noted things between Trustee Thornton on her left and a board member named Foster on her right. Margaret sat at the head with Jonah across from Clara, close enough to maintain the appearance of a couple, but far enough to be separated by conversation. It was deliberate. Everything Margaret arranged was deliberate. Clara ate her soup and answered the opening questions that were not really questions: how she was finding Denver, whether the mountain country was to her taste, how she occupied herself during Jonah's absences on the trap lines. She answered each one with the particular precision of a woman who understood exactly what was being measured. Thornton was the first to probe seriously. Your family, Mrs. Hale, what was your father's occupation? He asked it with the practiced casualness of a man who asked this kind of thing regularly at tables like this and considered it polite inquiry. He was a freight hauler and supplier. Honest work. He died in October. She said this last without sentiment, just fact. He was a good man. And you were educated. At home, my mother taught me the foundations. My father's accounts taught me the rest. She met Thornton's gaze. I've managed financial records since I was 16. I can read a balance sheet in most ledger formats and identify irregularities without difficulty. She smiled pleasantly. Is there a specific area of our affairs you'd like to discuss? Thornton blinked. No, I'm simply curious about your background. Of course, she returned to her soup. From across the table, she did not look at Jonah, but she was aware of him, the slight shift in his posture that she had learned meant suppressed amusement. Margaret tried a different approach during the fish course. I find your arrangement so interesting, she said, addressing the table generally but looking at Clara. Jonah has been so isolated up there, we worried about him. A mountain man's life can be terribly hard on a woman. You must find it challenging. Not particularly. Clara set down her fork. I find the work satisfying. I've always been better at things that require sustained effort over time, rather than the kind of success that comes quickly and doesn't last. She looked at Margaret directly. Some people prefer the latter. It's a matter of what you're building toward, I suppose. The implication landed in the silence the way a stone lands in water ripples moving outward, invisible and inevitable. Foster on Clara's right shifted in his chair. Thornton cleared his throat. Margaret's smile remained, but something behind it had tightened. How did you and Jonah meet? She asked. We've all been so curious. My father knew his father. Clara said it simply. They served together in the early days before the company was what it became. When my father was dying and the debts were due, Jonah came. She paused. He settled the debts, transferred the land to my name, and asked me to be his wife. I agreed. The table was quiet. Clara picked up her fork again. I know how that sounds to people for whom a match must involve better circumstances. But I've found that the marriages that last are built on things more solid than circumstance. She looked at Jonah. He has been unfailingly honest with me. He has never made me feel small. He treats me as a partner in the actual business of our life, not as an ornament. She turned back to the table. I consider that worth rather more than a courtship with flowers. Jonah was looking at her with an expression she had not quite seen before, not the careful neutrality, not the suppressed amusement. Something quieter. Something that required him to look away after a moment. Margaret tried it once more toward the end of the meal. Children, Clara, you must be thinking about that. At your age, she said at your age, the way a knife goes in sideways. Mountain life can be so difficult for mothers. Clara set down her wine glass. Margaret, she said it gently without heat. I notice you've spent this evening asking about my education, my origins, my domestic arrangements, and my reproductive future. That's a great deal of inquiry for a social occasion. She met the older woman's eyes. I understand you have concerns about Jonah's marriage. I understand one, but I want to be honest with you since we're all committed to honesty at this table. She paused. The marriage is real. It is more real than it was the day we signed the contract, and it will be more real still in a year. If that troubles you, I'm sorry, but I think you knew that before tonight. I think you hoped you'd find something different when you met me. The table had gone quiet. Every pair of eyes was on Clara. She picked up her wine glass and took a sip. I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening, she said pleasantly. After dinner, the dancing. Clara danced with Jonah and with two board members who introduced themselves with the slightly stunned air of men who had come to observe a spectacle and found something else entirely. She said nothing more remarkable. She was polite, warm in the general way of a woman who is at ease rather than performing ease, and she watched the room shift, not dramatically, not with a turning point anyone could have named, but the quality of the attention changed the way it does when people recalibrate when they revise a judgment they had made too quickly. Thornton sought her out near the end of the evening. Mrs. Hale, he said, a question if I may. Of course. The arrangement you described, the debt settlement, the contract, I want to be certain I understand. He was choosing his words with care. You were aware from the beginning that this was, shall we say, a practical arrangement rather than a romantic one. Yes. And you entered it knowingly, without coercion, with the full understanding that I had a choice. She met his gaze. The choice was not between abundance and desperation, but it was a choice. I made it. She paused. The fact that I made it under difficult circumstances doesn't make it less mine. Thornton was quiet for a moment. You have a rather unusual way of looking at things, Mrs. Hale. I've had to. Unusual circumstances require it. He nodded, slow and thoughtful. Good evening, he said, and walked away with the look of a man revising something. In the carriage returning to the hotel, Jonah was very quiet. Clara sat beside him and let the silence be. She was tired, the particular exhaustion of sustained attention, of 2 hours performing competence without letting anyone see the effort behind it. You said I was your partner, Jonah said finally. More real than the day we signed the contract. Yes, that was the truth. Everything I said tonight was the truth. I don't perform well enough to have said it any other way. She looked at him. Is that a problem? He looked at her for a moment. No, he said. It's not a problem. The carriage moved through Denver's lit streets. Carson Webb, Jonah said, at the review. Yes, with 3 years of your documentation and 2 years of his own. Between them, it's airtight. And you trust him. I said I did. He nodded slow, then almost to himself. My father chose well. Clara looked out the window. Yes, she said, he did. The formal review was scheduled for the following morning at the territorial courthouse. Clara woke early. She dressed carefully, the same dress as the reception, which was the only appropriate thing she had brought, and stood at the window watching the street for a while before going down. Jonah was already at the table with coffee in that particular morning stillness that she had learned was not withdrawal but preparation, the way he gathered himself before something difficult. She sat across from him. They didn't speak for a while. They drank their coffee and let the morning be morning, and Clara thought about what she was going to say when they asked her about the marriage, and she was not afraid. She knew what the truth was. She had known since she burned that letter in the lamp flame. The courthouse was a granite building with the particular solemnity of institutions that take themselves seriously. The review chamber held the 5 trustees, 2 lawyers for Margaret's position, and as they entered, Clara saw Carson Webb already seated at the side, his face carefully neutral, a leather folder on the table before him. Margaret was already present, flanked by Richard. She looked at Clara when they came in with the eyes of a woman who had spent the night revising strategy. They sat. Braftoff, lead trustee, opened the proceedings with the formal language of a man who had run meetings like this before. Jonah testified first. He was methodical, precise, containing everything to fact. The marriage legal witness documented. The household operational established his wife present and functioning as partner in the management of the property. The terms of the agreement fulfilled in every particular as they had been for 3 years. Margaret's lawyers challenged the separate bedrooms. They challenged the origins of the marriage. They challenged the short acquaintance before the wedding. Jonah answered each challenge directly without defensiveness and without elaboration. Then it was Clara's turn. She was sworn in. She sat at the table with her hands folded before her and looked at Braftoft and waited. Mrs. Hale, Braftoft began, I want to address directly the central question before this panel. Was this marriage entered into as a genuine domestic union or as a contractual arrangement designed to satisfy the terms of your husband's agreement with the trustees? Clara was quiet for a moment. Both, she said. When you see, The room stilled. I want to be accurate, she continued. When I signed the marriage contract, I signed it for financial survival. My father had died. I had debts. I had no family and no prospects in a territory that offers very little to women in my circumstances. Jonah Hale offered me a legal arrangement that settled the debts, transferred land to my name, and provided housing in exchange for my presence as his wife in my discretion about his affairs. She paused. That was 6 weeks ago. It was a business arrangement. I want the panel to know that because I am not willing to stand here and claim I married for love when I did not know the man I was marrying. She looked at each trustee in turn. I believe honesty is worth more in this room than performance. Margaret's lawyer leaned forward. So you confirm? I'm not finished, Clara said. The lawyer sat back. I am telling you what the marriage was when it began. I am also telling you what it is now, and those are two different things. She kept her voice level and clear. I know my husband, not in the way people know each other after years, but in the way that you know someone when you have worked beside them, learned from them, faced difficulties with them, and watched how they behave when no one who matters is watching. I know that he is honest even when honesty is costly. I know that he is careful with the things that matter, his land, his word, the documentation he has spent 3 years building because he believes in doing things right, even when the right way is harder. She paused. I know that when I wake before dawn, he is already at work. I know that he trusts my judgment on things he understands better than I do, and I know that is not something most men do. She looked at the trustees. I did not plan to feel what I feel. I plan to fulfill a contract and survive. But I want this panel to know the truth, and the truth is that what Jonah Hale and I have built in 6 weeks is more real than most of what I have seen called a marriage. She looked at Braftoft directly. I chose him, not 6 weeks ago under pressure. Now in this room with all the alternative options visible, I choose him. That is what I am prepared to say under oath. The room was very quiet. Braftoft looked at her for a long moment over his spectacles. Thank you, Mrs. Hale, he said finally. Carson Webb was called next. Margaret's lawyer stood immediately. Mr. Webb is employed by... I was employed by Margaret Hale, Carson said. Past tense. He set the folder on the table. I was trained by Warren Hale. Before that distinction, nothing else matters. He testified for 40 minutes. He was precise, methodical, thorough, the same qualities Clara had read in his documentation. He presented the evidence in clean sequence, the shell company formations, the contract irregularities, the fund transfers, the names of officials who had been paid to look in other directions. He presented his own investigation logs showing date, time, and content of what he had reported to Margaret versus what he had documented independently. He presented the 6 months in which he had watched Jonah Hale's Valley and found nothing that constituted immoral conduct, instability, or any violation of the agreement terms. And he presented last a sealed letter. This was given to me by Warren Hale 6 months before his death, Carson said. He asked me to hold it until I was certain it would reach the right people at the right time. He looked at Braftoft. I believe this is the right time. Braftoft opened the letter. He read it. His expression did not change, but something behind it shifted a weight descending or a decision firming. He passed it to the trustee on his left without speaking. It moved around the table. Clara watched Margaret's face as the letter reached the trustees. She watched the calculations happening behind the older woman's eyes, The same calculations she recognized from her own worst nights, when the math didn't work and she had to decide what she could salvage. Jonah was watching too. When the letter had completed its circuit, Brafthoff set it on the table. This letter, he said, constitutes Warren Hale's personal account of financial irregularities he identified in the months before his death, along with his instructions to the trustees should those irregularities be documented by independent investigation. He looked at Margaret. Mrs. Hale, the board will require you to remain available for questioning. Margaret's face had gone pale beneath her composure. These allegations are The allegations are documented, Brafthoff said, by 3 independent sources over 3 years, including a private investigator you yourself hired. His voice was not unkind, but it was final. This review is concluded on the question of the marriage's legitimacy, which I find to be established beyond reasonable challenge. He banged his gavel. The financial allegations will be referred to a separate proceeding. Mrs. Hale Richard, please remain. Mr. and Mrs. Jonah Hale, you are dismissed. I am. They walked out of the courthouse into November sunshine, cold and bright, the kind of light that makes everything look very clear. Clara kept walking until they were half a block from the building. Then she stopped. Jonah stopped beside her. For a moment they stood there on the Denver sidewalk while people walked past them with the purposeful indifference of city people, and the sun came down on the granite buildings, and somewhere down the street a horse was complaining about something. The letter, Clara said. My father prepared for everything. His voice was rough at the edges. He always said the most important documents were the ones you wrote before you needed them. She looked at him. He was looking at the mountains just visible at the far end of the street, white-tipped, indifferent to Denver's concerns. I meant what I said, Clara said. In there. He turned to look at her. I know you know that, she said. But I wanted to say it to you and not to a room full of trustees. She held his gaze. I choose this. You, not the contract, not the circumstances. She paused. I thought you should hear it without an audience. Jonah was very still. I know I'm not what you imagined, she continued. I know this started as Clara. His voice was quiet. Stop explaining. She stopped. He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. He held it out. She took it. She unfolded it. It was the marriage contract. Their contract, the original document, the one they had both signed in the judge's office. But it had been written over in the white space beside each formal clause in Jonah's precise handwriting. Beside housing, food, and clothing, a place that is yours. Not borrowed, not conditional. Beside management of the household partnership in everything we build. Beside maintained discretion, trust given freely without keeping accounts. And at the bottom below, all the formal language, below the signatures and the witnesses' names, a single line added in fresh ink. I choose this. Do you, Clara, read it twice? Then she looked up at him. Yes, she said. He kissed her there on the Denver sidewalk, which was not the most dignified place, but turned out to be exactly sufficient. So, they rode home 2 days later. Not running, coming back. The difference was the thing Clara had not known to name until she felt it, the difference between moving away from something and moving toward it. The valley, when it appeared below them over the last ridge, was not a hiding place anymore. It was a home. She had not thought she would recognize the distinction when she felt it. She recognized it immediately. The aspens had finished their gold and gone bare, the meadow settling into its winter colors, brown and silver, and the deep green of the pine stands. The river moved slower now, a wide silver thread. The lodge stood in the middle of it all, exactly as it had the first time she'd seen it. Impossible, real, more than she had expected. We have work to do, Jonah said, looking at the valley. We always have work to do. No, I mean with the company, when the agreement expires. He looked at her. That's 2.5 years. I want to use it. She looked at him sideways. Tell me. The board will be in chaos after the investigation. Some will resign. Some will cooperate to avoid prosecution. The trustees who were neutral, Brafthoff, Henderson, they'll need someone to work with during the transition. He paused. I've been documenting what Margaret did wrong. I need someone to help me document what needs to be done right, to build the structure that can't be dismantled the same way a second time. Clara looked at the valley. She thought about the ledgers, the 3 years of careful documentation. The worker safety standards Jonah's father had established that Margaret had stripped back. The shell companies, the fund transfers. She thought about what she had said to the trustees. I know that he is careful with the things that matter. His land, his word, the documentation he has spent 3 years building, because he believes in doing things right, even when the right way is harder. Worker protections, she said, not just safety standards, contractual protections, something that survives a change of management. Jonah looked at her. Wages tied to company revenue in writing, a workers' fund that exists independently of the board's discretion, standards that require independent verification rather than internal sign-off. She looked at him. Things that can't be quietly removed the way the safety protocols were. He was very still. You've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about most things. He almost smiled. You have. They sat on their horses at the ridge and looked at the valley for another moment, the home, the future, the 2.5 years of work that waited below. The garden, Clara said. What? I told you when we married that I wanted to expand the garden. I haven't done it yet. That's first. She urged her mare forward, starting down the slope. Everything else after. Jonah followed, which was what he did, not behind her, beside her, and sometimes ahead when the trail required it. That was what they had built. That was what they were building still. 2 years later, the letter from the trustees arrived on a Tuesday in January, which was the kind of detail Clara noted because she noted everything. It was formal. It was conclusive. The investigation into Margaret Hale's financial conduct had resulted in criminal charges. The board had been restructured. The trustees requested Jonah's presence in Denver to discuss the terms of his return to operational control. He read it at the kitchen table while Clara made coffee. When she brought the cups and sat across from him, he handed her the letter without speaking. She read it. She set it down. Well, she said. Well, he agreed. They drank their coffee. Outside the valley lay under January snow, deep and quiet, the river running low under ice, the mountains white to their bases. The world contracted to this particular fold of land that most maps didn't bother to include. Are you ready? She asked. No, so. He said it simply. But I'll be ready enough. That's usually sufficient. He looked at her across the table, the look she had learned to read as I'm about to say something, I mean completely. I couldn't have done this without you. No, she agreed. You couldn't. He laughed, really laughed, which still surprised her sometimes the way it had changed his face. She had learned to like it very much. We go together, she said, of course. I want the workers' fund clause in the first board resolution. I know. And the independent safety verification. I know. And Clara. He reached across the table and took her hand. I know. We built the list together. I haven't forgotten any of it. She looked at their hands on the table, the plain silver ring and the sapphire beside it, the ring he had given her on the porch the evening after the review, when she had asked why, and he had said because what we have now deserves better than what we started with. She had not disagreed. All right, she said, Denver. When? Next week. I'll need a new dress. We'll get one. Something that doesn't say mountain woman pretending to belong. Something that says exactly what you are, he said, which is the most dangerous person in any room you walk into. She looked at him. Margaret told me that, he said. After the review, she pulled me aside to tell me I'd made a terrible mistake marrying someone with nothing to lose, he paused. She meant it as an insult. I know. Clara stood taking the coffee cups to the sink. She wasn't wrong, though. No, Jonah said. She wasn't. Outside, the snow held the valley in its winter quiet. The mountains stood where they had always stood, keeping their counsel. The lodge behind them was full of books and ledgers and 3 years of careful documentation, and 2.5 years of life lived in the same space by two people who had learned each other slowly, honestly, without pretense. Clara looked out the window at the valley that was hers, legally, personally, in every way that mattered, and thought about her father's letter, and about what he had hoped she would find, and about how inadequate the word hope was for what she had actually found. I hope he's what I believe him to be. I hope you'll have a chance to find out. She had found out. She turned from the window. Let's get to work, she said, and they did.